Welcome to this week's Upon Further Review. We're going to continue to look at how modern wedding customs illustrate the truths of biblical covenants. If you haven't watched Covenant Part 1, I encourage you to do so before watching this Part 2 video. Last week we got the bride down the aisle between what was essentially a picture of karat belit, the cutting of a covenant, by walking between the pieces of sacrificial animals. Once the bride reaches the front and is standing there beside her groom, the pastor begins the wedding with the familiar, "We are gathered here today in the sight of God and these witnesses, as this man and woman pledge themselves in holy matrimony." And it sounds pretty cut and dry. If it's a Christian ceremony, we already recognize that God's present. And the witnesses, of course, are all the guests that were invited to celebrate the wedding. As a matter of fact, at least two of them are going to have to sign the marriage certificate stating that they physically saw or witnessed the couple getting married. But upon further review, we're going to look at various scriptures where a covenant was cut, what served as a witness, and why. We're going to delve into the next elements of a covenant that really are interrelated: witnesses and signs. We're going to begin with Abraham and the Philistine king named Abimelech. This encounter is actually recorded in Genesis chapter 21, starting in verse 22. And it says, "Now it came about at that time that Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, spoke to Abraham, and he said, 'God's with you in all you do. Now therefore swear to me here by God that you will not deal falsely with me or with my offspring or with my posterity, but according to the kindness that I have shown you, you will show me into the land in which you have sojourned.' And Abraham said, 'I swear it.'" Now in this encounter, who was the actual first witness that was mentioned? God, Abraham's God. God was to bear witness to this covenant of peace that wouldn't just last until Abraham left Philistia, or even after Abraham died, but it would last forever, throughout the generations, forever. So let's keep going, starting in verse 25. "But Abraham complained to Abimelech because of the well of water which the servants of Abimelech had seized. And Abimelech said, 'I don't know who's done this. You never told me, and I didn't even hear about it until today.' Abraham took sheep and oxen, and he gave them to Abimelech, and the two of them made a covenant. Then Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock by themselves. And Abimelech said to Abram, 'What do these 7 lambs mean, which you have set by themselves?' And Abraham said, 'You will take these 7 lambs from my hand, so that it may be a witness to me that I dug this well.'" Now we see an even different witness. Now we have animals. I know, more animals, but unlike last week, at least these animals get to live. In verse 33, there's actually a third witness. It says Abraham planted a tamarisk tree at Beersheba, and there he called on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned in the land of the Philistines for many days. So let's jump ahead a bit to Genesis chapter 31, verse 43, and Abraham's grandson, Jacob. Jacob was ready to leave his uncle Laban and go back home. Laban, however, refused to let him leave. So Jacob packed up his wives, his kids, his servants, his animals, and he snuck out in the middle of the night. Now Laban caught up with him, and they made a covenant of peace that would, again, continue throughout the generations, long after Jacob and Laban were dead. So picking up the scripture, Laban says to Jacob, "So now come, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me." And then Jacob took a stone and he set it up as a pillar. And then Jacob said to his kinsmen, "Gather stones." So they took the stones and they made a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Okay, so what do flocks of animals, trees, and rocks have to do with a wedding? And really, how can they be witnesses to anything? Let's face it, folks, lambs are dumb, animals can't talk, and trees and rocks are inanimate objects. And to that I say, you're exactly right. And that's exactly the point. They aren't witnesses in our modern sense, but reminders. Flocks of animals have babies who have babies who have babies throughout multiple generations. Rocks and trees are pretty eternal. They certainly are going to outlast any of us. And that's really what the point is. The witnesses were reminders or signs to the parties making the covenant. When Abimelech or his long-distant relative would take a flock to the well to drink, they'd remember whose well it was and not to chase off Abraham's distant relative who happened to be watering his flock at the same time. And when Laban's distant relatives saw the stone pillars, the literal heap of witnesses, he would be reminded to do no harm to Jacob's relatives. And it explained so beautifully beginning in verse 48. Laban said, "This heap of witness between you and me this day." Therefore it was named Gilead, which literally means a heap of witnesses, and Mizpah, which means a watchtower. For he said, "May the Lord watch between you and me when we are absent from one another. If you mistreat my daughters, or if you take wives besides my daughters, although no man is with us, God is a witness between you and me." And Laban said to Jacob, "Behold this heap, and behold the pillar which I have set between you and me. This heap is a witness, and the pillar is a witness, that I will not pass by this heap to do you harm, and you will not pass by this pillar to do me harm. The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, will judge between us." When a bride and groom approach the altar and the pastor pronounces that their covenant is being witnessed by God and their guests, it's to remind them, and even when they are separate from one another, they're still in covenant. The family that's being made through their covenant will continue into numerous generations to come. The real pressure is on us witnesses. It's our responsibility to speak up if we see or hear either partner begin to stray or to break their covenant. We're their watchtower, their heap of reminding witnesses. Ultimately, however, it's going to be God who judges their actions. Another element of covenant that's linked with witnesses are signs. The sign of the Davidic covenant are the sun and the moon. Psalms 89 tells us, "His descendants will endure, and his throne as the sun before me. It shall be established forever like the moon, and the witness in the sky is faithful." The sign of the Davidic covenant, the promised Messiah from the lineage of David who will sit on the throne forever, are the moon and the sun. They are witnesses, they are reminders for us that Messiah came and he's going to come again. And the sign of the Mosaic covenant is Shabbat, or Sabbath. We read in Exodus 13, God says, "But for you, speak to the sons of Israel, saying, you will surely observe my Sabbaths. For this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am the God who sanctifies or sets apart you." Not only is Sabbath a sign of the Mosaic covenant through which we received the 10 Commandments, it's also a witness or reminder. Every Sabbath, every Shabbat, we're reminded of the laws that God gave not only to the Hebrew people through Moses, but to all of us who come under the headship of the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. In ancient cultures, it wasn't unusual to exchange amulets or phylacteries as a sign or witness of a covenant. And during wedding ceremonies, we exchange rings. We literally wear and bear our own sign and witness of our covenant marriage. Modern weddings, while customized and personalized by the couple, there's certain traditions and customs that still remain, and most people don't even know where these ideas came from. However, upon further review, we've looked at 3 different elements that illustrate biblical covenant truths. Last week, we looked at literally cutting a covenant. This week, we saw the responsibility that the wedding guests have as witnesses. We also saw the weightiness of entering into the covenant of marriage with God, not only as a witness of the covenant, but the eternal, omnipresent judge of the covenanting partners. We then looked at the significance of our wedding rings. They not only serve as a witness to the world that we're married, but also as a witness to us of our own covenant vows. The inscription on my own wedding ring says Brit Haolam, which means eternal covenant. So thank you for joining us this week for Upon Further Review. Next week, we're going to look at another element of covenant and see how it fits in with modern wedding traditions. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share my YouTube channel. And while you're there, check out the other studies that are available. I'd love to hear from you guys, so drop me a message in the comment section below. Until then, shalom, shalom.